is a quick video on the chronology of my musical creative discovery process that got me involved with music. So initially, I was exposed to a lot of music as a kid. I came from a musical family, and I wasn't really interested in creating music at that time. But at age around 11 or 12, I heard the music of Sergei Prokofiev, and that catapulted me into wanting to create music. It seemed like an interesting way to express emotions, basically. And I had very wild range of emotions as a young person. And so I was always looking for the outlet, as many young people do, to find a way to channel that energy. So anyway, the music of Prokofiev seemed to be a way to do that. And so I tried to figure out, basically, first to hear more of it, and then eventually to want to create that kind of music. So I started out by getting involved with that sort of classical side of music on the creative side, actually wanting to make it. And the only reason I was able to get a little bit of a head start was because my father had attended Juilliard. However, he had deceased before I was like even 2. So I never actually got to meet him. However, I did hear his recordings, and he also left behind a lot of stuff from Juilliard. So they had given him a lot of stuff to study, and so he had all these records, plus he had the usual records that people gathered during that time of the Beatles and all that. And I've never actually been a huge fan of the Beatles. They have some nice songs, but they didn't touch me ever, my whole life, basically, the way that some music really hits me. I've always been emotionally impacted by music, but the Prokofiev stuff was different. It made me want to make music. And so I heard this music. I'm looking into the books of my father, and he just happened to have a manuscript, a little book of the Prokofiev Third Piano Concerto. Of all things to have, which is one of the most incredible pieces of music that was ever created, because the big difference between the Prokofiev music and the regular classical music was it was unchained from the music theory completely and totally and utterly, which is funny because it was given to people to study as a way of music. So it's still a theory, but it's just not really directly connected to the essential stuff you would learn. And so that music was so wild and evocative and evolving that was what the spark was to make me want to continue trying to pursue that as a maker, creator. So that's where I got involved with classical music. And later on, I got involved with modern music, even though I had heard a lot of modern music from growing up with DJs. My mother and my grandfather was listening to sort of the music of the era, which was Footloose and the Mambo Kings, and a lot of music from TV actually too, because PBS and TV and all these influences were starting to come out with this musical side, Staying Alive and all this. So I got involved with more modern music because I kind of realized that the classical world was not really going to be a moneymaker. And at some point I wanted to get involved with forging a career. Now, that's just for me that wasn't going to be a moneymaker. There's other people that could carve out niches and actually pursue that. And I never saw myself as being a performer in the context of performing in bands or even my own solo performances, just because I've always been obsessed with making masterpieces of music. And I don't want to get into political stuff, but the performing side to me has always been like way too loud, and I don't like the randomness of it. Some people say that's the best part, but I'm the perfectionist. I wanted to perfect capture. So anyways, that's why I kind of gravitated towards making production-oriented works, not works that would necessarily be performed by me or anyone, really. So I had some initial success with the classical stuff at 14, but that wasn't like a commercial success. So I heard the work of Seal, and that was the next big milestone moment for me. And I don't recall the exact age, and I actually made a timeline like this on my LinkedIn recently, just to kind of remember it for myself. Everything is about always growing my information and studying and always ever learning and growing with this world of music. It's been so giving and so such a good way to, get away from the noise of the rest of the world when possible, when it's not making a mess for me. But I got involved with more modern music because of Seal and because of Crazy, not Kiss from a Rose, sorry. So that's where I have a lot of trouble with the commercial sides. I always gravitate towards the music that's in my heart. And I like stuff that stimulates me, and I don't, it's like I don't necessarily go after the stuff that's popular. So that's where there's this huge conflict. And I'm definitely not on the pop side of that stuff, although I truly appreciate masterpieces. So it really becomes a moot point, worrying about all that. So I got involved with making some modern music, doing pieces here and there, maybe 20, 30 pieces, sort of fusing in classical music and wanting to make really the greatest music I could possibly make. That's always been the agenda. And, then also forging that with some kind of viable career. And that's kind of worked hand in hand when I was growing up, that you'd have to make really exceptional music to be commercial. They set a very, very high standard. So anyways, I did get involved with a sample CD maker named Ubershaw, and they were awesome enough to give me my very first break. And the guy's name is Uwe, really wonderful person to do that. And so I did a couple of CDs for them. It really wasn't a strength of mine, but however, that's where I developed Groove Shadows. And so that was based on studying, the modern producers like Teddy Riley, Trevor Horn, and many countless others. But especially them, because I studied those recordings over and over and over, listening for the number of elements that were inside them, just making sure I noticed everything, and then trying to figure out, how can I do this myself? Because part of the musical creation process is working with limitations and then figuring out how to unlimit them or delimit them. And so basically it was like a whole thing where I would realize I needed this many parts, but I didn't have enough power. And this was in the beginning of the DAW, the Digital Audio Workstation, revolution really, where everybody wasn't just producing music like now, and so it was something you had to figure out, putting the pieces together. It was amazing these people envisioned that this would be so popular, and it did turn out to be a very popular thing. And I'm really glad that companies like companies like Logic Audio and Cubase and all these guys were able to sustain all these years. So, and also develop things well beyond what I could have ever imagined. But I especially liked it when they started to mix in the scoring and notation capabilities better and better in with the DAW, because I was familiar with it at the time, and I like being able to have both the ability to perform in with my fingers and then also do some notation. And so I always appreciated a good score editor, and actually one of the first DAWs I used was Cakewalk, and they had a really great score editor. So, long story short, this has already been way too long. I didn't mean to go on this one, I'm sorry. The next thing was, so my grandfather passed away, and I had to do something to sort of change some situations and scenarios in my life. I hadn't had real huge commercial success, and I never will probably, but at the time I needed to do something to make a big change. So I moved to California thanks to a couple of very, very nice people who were willing to, basically set me up there so that I could stay with them and get sorted and all these things. And continue my music. They really were music purists. They wanted to continue the development of music just as badly as I did. And they knew that staying in a town like I was in, which is actually here, but at the time when you're young and you're still trying to develop, there's a lot of forces working against, the pursuits of the arts. And it's reasonable, especially considering what's happened to the arts, why people think that way and why they want to be that way and why they're looking out for people. And so anyways, I got involved eventually with production music. Now that was a lifesaver, because when I moved to San Francisco, there was a split deal. There was the bands and thousands of all these really great extrovert people bands. And then the other side of it was making music for media, which is what I call production music. And that was a real godsend. And people take production music lightly, where it's to me, it was such an important area to be able to develop. And why that is because it was unlimited. You could do many kinds of things, and that's where I grew to develop more skills. But I also never knew what was going to happen, so I kept an ear on the bands and what was going on with bands. And my roommates were both band-oriented people, much more so than any of the other stuff. However, they were both, pretty much geniuses with music. And so that's the only reason that they would allow some crazy person from Florida to come in there and have a shot at the big time. So I did get more heavily invested into production music, which is a steep learning curve. Especially since I didn't come from California. I didn't have any clue what was going to happen. It was a totally different experience than Florida. But the people reminded me a lot of Floridians. They really did. And that was the real surprise, too. It was how similar some things were and some things were not. But so the next thing was to get, really invested into the production music, which meant more orchestral, more modern discovery and learning, and things like that. And so basically I could continue to grow all the things that I love to do and potentially have more commercial success. You have to have a goal of commercial success with the world the way that it works, but you also have a heart of a purist, because it's there's no point in the art without the purity of why you wanted to do it and being in touch with your roots. Just to become a total quote-unquote sellout, there's just no point. At least there wasn't by the my generation, by our upbringing. It's the point was to create new things and to be useful in the development of the arts, at least for one aspect of musical creation and entertainment. So, because for me, at least the way I absorbed music was I like to hear new, novel, unique, extraordinary things. And another person calls some of the things that I like high information music, Rick Beato. So that I agree completely. I really love stuff like that. That's why I was drawn to the high-tech producers of the era. And I was always drawn to that kind of music, very technical music. But technical music turned in a new direction when dubstep showed up. And so it became much more coding-oriented. So much more analysis on the synthesis side, and making things that are sort of mathematically very interesting, but very time-consuming to do, or very program-oriented, very programming-oriented. So I sort of didn't really fully accept that direction, and I stayed more toward just incorporating parts of that kind of music into my repertoire. So basically, that's kind of where I am even now, even with the newest stuff, the AI and all that. It's going to be a whole new ball game, of course. We're all aware of that. But however, that's just my explanation. The whole point of this video is really just my explanation of how in the world did I get involved with all these different kinds of music? Because production music is a real Pandora's box, and it'll make you do things that you wouldn't even necessarily think to do. And dubstep was one of them, but also things that I really admire even more, like world music. You always want to sprinkle in a piece here and there of it, but when you really need to understand the mechanisms, it's really interesting to try to sort of absorb that and become a sort of caricature of what they're doing. And that's what I've always done. When somebody said, do music like this, my first reaction is to sort of understand what they're trying to communicate with the music and then express that, not to just, line for line figure out what they did, sort of do a cheap copy. So, that's my way, and that's where I sort of go against the grain of commercialism because they want the sure stuff. So that's where I ended up doing all of these different kinds of music. So when people ask me, what kind of music do you do, or have you done anything that I would know, I've done 150 shows that have like various pieces of my music, and that's accumulated in about 1,500 plus placements. Thanks mostly to my publishers, and thanks to one, giant publisher in general, which is APM Music, which is a very distinguished company in LA, California. So I also, when they say, what kind of music do you do, it's a very hard thing to explain because I do songs, but I also I really love to do classical, and I also do sound design, and I also do like this vast spectrum in the middle of all that, but I also create new styles because of being exposed to all of these things. So that's sort of my explanation of why it's hard to explain myself and why I ended up doing so many kinds of genres, and why I gravitated towards creating these new styles was basically because I could see this piece and this piece can fit together, so there's an opportunity to do something novel there. And it doesn't stop. It's like once you start the ball rolling with that, you want to continue keeping that in the back of your mind to keep an eye out for the next soundbite or the next happy accent, the next thing that's going to catch you off guard to make you realize that's something cool, worth developing more. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope you can find out of the hundreds of pieces that I've done, probably like 900 plus. Half of it's externally published, and half of it's published by CMDess. And I'm now experimenting with disco, but really you can hear my music two ways. You can search my full legal name, or you can search CMDess, and one takes you to the artist, which is me, and then one takes you to sort of the externally published stuff that I did while I was in California. So that's the explanation for that, and that's my sort of sonic journey. And basically, in coming back to Florida, I figured out some things about getting back into the roots of my origins of music creation. So that's where I've stayed pretty steady and made quite a bit of progress here. So thanks for stopping by.